Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network. And welcome back, everybody. So whether you want to believe it or not, there's something inside of you that says you're not good enough. You're not worthy enough. You may think, man, that's impossible. We all have it in some different degrees. And many times there's a part of you that also protects that and then doesn't let any change take place. So now we live our lives feeling that we're not worthy enough, that we're not good enough in different scenarios and situations. Maybe you are aware of it. Maybe you think that. Maybe you're in a relationship and you just feel, I'm not good enough for this person, but you are. We're going to talk to somebody today that offers psychotherapy and a wonderful modality called IFS, and how it can benefit you and how it gets through those protectors, the gatekeepers that don't allow change to happen. Scott Moresi is back with us. How you doing today, Scott?
Doing great, Steve. How you doing?
Terrific. Yeah. And we're going to talk about doing the work on your own along with the therapy. But I think I would love to just start with what's going on inside of us and how in our subconscious it's protecting certain areas of us. We don't really want it to, but we don't know what's going on. Can you explain?
Yeah, sure. Like you were mentioning, if a person has a part of them that is, for instance, telling them they're not worthy, they're not good enough, that's a part that we'd consider, a type of a protector, a manager who's sort of always set in the on position and is hypervigilant, doesn't know that it can turn off, doesn't believe that it's safe to stop sending that messaging. And so it's stuck in the on position and it's trying to protect, it's trying to protect against that young part that believes it's unworthy. It's trying to protect that part from feeling that way anymore. But the problem is that critic part, let's say, if it's stuck in the on position and doesn't know how to turn off, then it's usually going to be polarized with a different type of protector called a firefighter, which has the opposite agenda, like an avoidant part or a distractor or a procrastinator that says, no, we're not doing all this stuff the critic wants. We're going to go shopping or, we're going to eat or drink or whatever brings on the distraction from the energy of the critic. And then the exile underneath of it, the part that carries the burden of believing it's not good enough, doesn't get better. It just keeps feeling not good enough. And the protectors don't know that.
Wow. So it sounds like those things, shopping, eating, alcohol, whatever it is a diversion. But I always thought it was a gratification. You're not going to do it unless it feels good.
Right. Sure. It's that too. Yeah. Okay. It's also gratifying. Yeah. It feels good. Brings on all the feel-good chemicals and diversion and distraction so that we don't feel the energy of the critic. And also so that we don't feel the energy of the exile, of not feeling good enough.
How do we get inside our head to start dissecting that? Or it's really almost impossible unless you're doing some type of therapy.
Yeah, I mean, especially something like IFS where, you said get into your head, right? And that's what a lot of us think. I think we're taught to some extent that because the problem feels like it's in our head, that's where we go. But that's not really where the problem is. I don't think. I find, and a lot of IFS folks find that the problem is much closer to the body. And so in order for us to kind of work with our parts, it's really helpful to get out of our heads, our mental experience of ourselves and our parts, and get into a very physical, a very tangible, pragmatic, concrete sense of presence in our bodies. That's not a mental experience. And so, for instance, as an example, let's say a person has these three parts up. They've got a critic telling them they're not good enough. They've got the exile believing it. And you've got this procrastinator, distractor part that's like, look at me over here. Don't pay attention to any of that. Right? So what we can do with all that energy, and that's a lot of energy for sure, and that's why a lot of people will, or well, not everybody, there's a lot of people who do like a self-therapy approach and they don't see therapists ever. They just do their own work in IFS, and that's fine. That's one school of thought. And then there's the school of thought that you should see an IFS therapist at least for a little while, to get a feel for the system before you practice it on your own. Read about it, take courses, etc. And so anyway, the point is that when we feel these energies, these three types of parts pulling on us, we really need the energy of self. And self presence is this. What does that mean, right? That's an idea, but it's also a real living thing that all of us know about. We just don't necessarily know we know it. And so if you feel, for instance, the energy of an exile pulling on you in your chest, in your heart, and it feels, I'm not good enough, and you feel the oppressive nature of the critic, and you feel the distracting nature, the procrastinator, you can drop your awareness down into, say, your seat, starting with your seat. Instead of up here with all that energy, you can drop your awareness down into your seat, ground there, notice how your breath responds to being aware of your seat. Then you can drop into your feet, same thing, and then you can drop into your breath. How does your breath respond to you being more aware of it? And then you can sort of scan your body from head to toe and notice, well, where am I feeling self-present? There's all this energy of these parts pulling on me here and pulling on me there, but where am I actually showing up right now? Where is it me? And that might be in your seat, or it might be in your heart. But anyway, once you find where you feel self-present, then we try to sort of immerse, like a tea bag being dropped into warm water, into that experience, to allow it to grow. And then the parts start to respond differently. The parts kind of go, there's something else here, and it's not only us. And then from that place, we can start to develop a different relationship with them.
Wow. A relationship with the parts.
Right.
Amazing.
Yeah.
You know, when you first said getting out of your head and making it more of a physical experience, I was wondering what you meant. And it really was, Scott. I was trying to think, like, where's he going with this? How are you going to do that? But now I see it. It's almost, you know, you're moving your thought, or that feeling lower. But I guess the key is knowing you've identified it, and now you're going to move it down, and now it's going to sit, you know, in your seat, and you know your breathing is different because you've made a little change going on there.
Right.
Wow.
Exactly. Yeah.
Is that part of the work that you do on your own in between sessions?
It is. Yeah. I'm even doing it right now as we speak on a subtle level.
Like right now?
Yeah.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Explain.
So as we're talking, there's a subtle amount of my, I guess you could call it awareness, or felt sense awareness of my seat and of my feet, you know, just kind of, because, you know, one of the things I think that's really cool about this kind of work, Steve, is like, you know how the five senses occupy a tremendous amount of real estate in our brain. You know, a large portion of our brain is devoted to our five senses. And so our parts don't, let me think about that for a second, Steve. Our parts don't really know that. I think that's true. Our parts don't get that. More than anything, they don't get that we're here. They don't get that. They think they're the only ones home. And so they don't really get that we're here. And one of the ways to communicate that we're here is to drop out of the thinking mind into the real estate of the body, so that the parts go, oh, wait a minute, there's somebody else here. We don't necessarily know who it is or what they're all about, Steve or Scott or whoever, but there's somebody else home. That's interesting.
Wow. See, I would never even think that would be the case. I would think that it's part of you. It's aware. The different parts are aware of what's going on, but it almost sounds as if they're on their own island.
I think in a lot of ways they are. I think, you know, the one of the big things about IFS that I think is so beautiful and powerful is that, you know, our parts are hurting and they're doing the things that they're doing in many ways to the extent that they don't know that we're an available resource to them, a viable and available resource to them. And you know, so when you think of the people in your life that you've known your whole life that are just really solid and kind of like a rock, and just nothing seems to rattle them, and kind of like, how are they like that? You know, how did they get that way? And some of the thinking on that is that without them necessarily knowing it, um, they probably had the opportunity to develop in a certain way where parts are considered, sort of like psychic structures in the mind that exist prior to experience. And so, left to their own devices, they developmentally self assign to various roles that make sense in the system. But when a trauma happens, it's a massive shock to the system. And so, these parts are forced into assigned roles that they didn't choose in a developmental way that was natural. And so they largely the problem when a person's going to see an IFS therapist, the problem is to some extent the parts don't know that that client is there and available to them. They just didn't learn that growing up. They didn't get a sense that someone else was home and that they didn't have to do so vigilantly what they do.
Can we, before we even go deeper into this, explain, if anybody missed previous podcasts, what IFS can help people do, the changes
Sure.
that it can make in your life?
Yeah. IFS is really great with, well, it's great with a lot of different things, but it's great with things that really interrupted our development, ultimately. Things that interrupted our psychological, emotional, even physical, somatic sense of ourselves. People who are real coordinated, it's thought, probably had a chance to develop in a certain way so that certain parts didn't get interrupted in their development. Um, so yeah, IFS is great with trauma, particularly. It's really a healthy way of working with the parts of us that get dysregulated as a result of trauma. It's also great with anxiety, mood disorders. It's a powerful approach with obsessive compulsive disorder, as well as addictions and eating disorders.
Wow. You said something a second ago that I've never heard it put this way. In terms of our development, something has interrupted our development. And
Yeah,
yes, I get it. Our childhood, we've gone through big traumas, little traumas, and that's really governing how we act in life now as adults. But I never thought of it that way, that something interrupted our development. We haven't fully developed even as adults.
right.
Wow. It's like, it's almost hard to fathom that, as we're doing adulting, paying bills, working hard, all of that life. But we're stuck. We're
Yeah.
kind of stuck somewhere, most of
Yeah.
us.
Right. Yeah. It was described to me in one of the intensive trainings that they do in IFS that it's kind of like, this is one scenario, but if there were parents in a home and their kids were young and they raised them up to the age of like 3 and 5 and 7, let's just say, and then for totally unexplainable reasons no one in the house knows, the parents just up and leave and they're gone and they don't come back for several years. So, but they do come back, let's say 7 years later, when those kids are much more grown, and they throw open their arms for a big hug. And those kids don't exactly run in for a big hug because they don't trust you. They don't really even get who you are anymore necessarily, or what kind of a viable or available resource you are to them. And so it's partly first about helping them understand who we are, and through relationship and experiential process that they learn we're that viable and available resource they've been looking for but didn't know it.
Wow. And then the parents in your example would represent who?
Us.
Us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now
Yeah.
let's put that into even real time understanding. Does that mean that we left ourselves as kids there to just kind of fend for ourselves? And how and why did that happen?
Yeah, it is. I think it is that we left ourselves at some age. It's thought that under extreme experiences, really powerfully traumatic experiences, that our parts have the capacity to actually eject ourself, has the capacity to throw the self outside the system so that the self cannot re-enter the system. And That's a really extreme form of trauma, but there's a lot of people who have that experience. And, talk therapies just generally are not equipped for that kind of trauma. There needs to be some sort of experiential relational process going on for the part to be able to understand that the self is there and is not a threat to the system.
Okay, so we have talk therapy, can be very impactful in many situations, but like we're talking here, doesn't go deep enough. How does this go deeper? What's going on? What's the magic here that gets it accomplished?
Good question. It's a great question. I think the magic is getting out of the head first. Getting out of the head and into the body is first, but it's not enough. And a lot of therapies do focus on getting into the body, being embodied and mindful. But from an IFS perspective, that's not enough. There needs to be, let me say it this way, actually. What I find when I'm working with people or doing my own work is that when people drop into their seat and their feet and their breath and they start to have a more embodied physical sense of themselves, what I think is going on is that the body and the mind are starting to become reintegrated a little bit, but that takes time. And just like the parents coming home after a long absence, the body and the mind are kind of strangers to each other with trauma. And so the magic is the ability to drop into the body and have that felt sense of space, of distinctness between us and our parts and our parts and our parts, so that we're not all confusing one another as the same. Then we can have a relationship that is not confused. And then from that relationship, we can heal the parts.
I totally have it crystal clear. Yeah. It's almost like taking inventory of everything, not just your mind, but your body too.
Yeah.
And what's actually going on there. Taking inventory of this part, that part, their relationship with each other, and then their connection to your body. It's almost, I'm trying to think of the best word, but holistic, maybe a touch of metaphysical, where you're getting out of your head and you're connecting to your body and you're actually feeling,
Right.
As opposed to being this tornado spinning in your mind where you're all over the place.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, Steve, the feeling piece that you're using there. I think you're using feeling in the way that I'm hearing it, but I'm going to use the word sensing only as a way of distinguishing from emotion feeling. Because a lot of times I think when people hear feeling, they think, oh, we need to go in and feel feelings. But really, that's not what we're doing. We're dropping in and sensing into the real estate that is our body, that takes up such a huge portion of our brain, so that our parts go, oh, wait a minute, there's somebody else home and it isn't us. Who is this?
Do you feel that maybe there's a stranger living there in your mind? I.e. one of your parts, but it's kind of a stranger living in your house?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they are, right? We are strangers to them, and they're strangers to us. And it's interesting, I think, that that strangerhood is part of what creates that lack of distinctness and that tendency for confusion of thinking that we are our parts or our parts are us. Like when like oftentimes people will say, oh my God, I got up late today. I messed up my alarm and I was late for work and I was being so mean to myself all morning. Well, that's a bit of a confusion. That's from an IFS perspective, that's not what was going on. What was going on is, well, okay, let's say, I don't know, this is just digging something out of the dirt, for instance, but let's say the person overslept last night because they drank and maybe they have a drinking problem. And the critic jumped on them all morning because that caused them to wake up late and be late to work. And that critic part is being motivated by memories of times that maybe they had a heavy-handed father who was a drinker. And so that critic part is being motivated to try to keep them from being like their father, memories of that, which is also trying to protect against the feelings of probably not being good enough, the exiles, the young parts that feel, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, say, for this job, for this success or whatever. And so that person might have a vicious cycle of
Yeah.
troublesome problems in their life.
And what you're referring to sounds like a trigger. Something got triggered.
Yeah, yeah, right. But the idea that the person was being mean to themselves all morning, that's the confusion. Because they weren't really being mean to themselves. There was a part of them that was angry with them for messing up.
So, and totally understand that. We've all been there before. Like, I can't believe I did that. I can't believe I said that. Ugh.
Right.
But now you're one of your parts is punishing you. It sounds like.
Yeah. Trying to keep you from doing it again.
Right.
Like dad.
And shame. I mean, yeah. Shame's a big one.
Yeah. Right. And the shame is what keeps that critic so vocal. If the shame wasn't so strong, feeling I'm no good and I'm not worthy, the critic would calm way down. And so that's the goal ultimately in this work, is to heal the exile so the protectors don't feel they have to do their job so much.
Amazing that this is all going on and that IFS and you have identified it. And we just need to do the work. Because how much better life would be, if you're not dealing, with stressed out, frustrated, angry, etc. parts within. Yeah. Final question.
Yeah.
Is the number of parts within potentially infinite? Are there so many? Yeah. Or is there, you got, most of us, we got, 7, picking any number. But really, it goes way deeper. It just kind of trickles down in terms of importance, but it's there.
Yeah, I think so. I think that a helpful exercise that is useful for people with something like that, Steve, is right. The parts can be infinite, probably to some extent, but the number of kind of target parts or working parts that we have is usually somewhere in a handful or 2 handfuls of parts or so, and so it's oftentimes helpful for any of us in a moment like when let's say you have a public speaking engagement.
Sure.
Some kind of a trailhead. In IFS, we call it a trailhead, a trigger, something that brings up our parts. And let's say one way to do a quick assessment is to notice, well, not necessarily how many parts are up, but which parts are up. In the foreground, if you think of a stage,
yes.
Which parts are up in the foreground of my life right now, in the midground, and in the background?
Totally got it. Wow. Which is very impactful. And they can flip position all the time, depending on the situation.
That's right. Yeah.
Super cool. I'm going to change what you said today. I'm going to focus and be intentional on in terms of moving maybe what's here down lower and observing breathing and the feeling and the physical aspect of it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Super
Sounds
cool.
Great.
Scott, what's the best way to find you? Somebody, this resonates. I know it's pretty deep, but it's proven and it works and it's life-changing. How do they find you?
Yeah, beyondwordpsychotherapy.com or 510-735-8868. Feel free to reach out, see if we're a good fit.
When we talked about what we were going to talk about before we got on here, I got to be honest, I was like, I don't know. That could be a little confusing. I don't find it confusing at all. You make it very clear of what's going on within us and what needs to heal. And for that, I thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate it.
Yep. And we'll catch up soon. We'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Not completing high school is more of a social thing than it was an academic thing. I came out in the 11th grade. Nobody was embracing you. The kids were cruel. It was very difficult to be gay. Even though all these years have passed, I still had that longing to have my diploma.
The hard part was determining that I was going to do it, but I definitely didn't do it alone.
At age 30, with the help of her mentor, Carissa finished her high school diploma.
I have a mentor, Maria. She convinced me to continue my education
and to finish what I started to get my diploma.
Just never judges. She's a true role model. If you're even considering getting your high school diploma, go get it. You can do it.
No one gets a diploma alone. If you're thinking of finishing your high school diploma, you have help. Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org. That's finishyourdiploma.org. Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.